The final notes of the fiddle hung in the air like smoke in a crowded saloon, lingering just long enough to make a man want more. Clara Ellison tucked a loose strand of chestnut hair behind her ear as she lowered her instrument, her nimble fingers still warm from the strings. The applause that followed was scattered but sincere, punctuated by the clink of coins tossed into her open fiddle case at the edge of the small platform that passed for a stage in the frontier saloon of Las Animas, Colorado. Clara's eyes inadvertently drifted to the corner table where he sat, the quiet cowboy with the watchful gaze. Zachary Cole. He'd been there every night for the past 3 weeks, nursing the same whiskey, his eyes never leaving her as she played. Unlike the other men who hollered and whistled, his appreciation came in silent nods and the reliable ritual of walking her home after her performance, no matter the hour or the weather. It was 1878, and Las Animas was growing from a dusty waypoint to a proper town with the railroad's expansion. For a woman alone like Clara, the opportunities were few, teaching if you were educated, sewing if you were skilled, or entertaining if you were talented. Clara had her fiddle, her mother's final gift before consumption took her 2 years prior. What had begun as a desperate means to avoid starvation had become her identity in this frontier town. "Another fine show, Miss Ellison," remarked Edward Porter, the saloon owner, as he placed a glass of water beside her. "The regulars come as much for your playing as they do for my whiskey these days." Clara smiled politely, though she knew that Porter paid her a fraction of what the piano player received. "Thank you, Mr. Porter. I appreciate the opportunity." "That cowboy's still here," Porter noted, nodding toward Zachary's table. "3rd week running, never causes trouble, barely drinks enough to pay for his chair, just listens to you play." Clara felt a warmth creep into her cheeks. "He's been a gentleman. Just be careful. Even the quiet ones have stories they don't tell." Porter moved away to attend to rowdier patrons, leaving Clara to collect her earnings. The coins in her case would cover her rent and maybe a new ribbon for her hair. It wasn't much, but it was honest work, and in this town that counted for something. She carefully placed her fiddle in its worn case, latching it with practiced hands. As she gathered her shawl around her shoulders, preparing for the cool spring night, she noticed Zachary rising from his seat. "Miss Ellison," he said, approaching with his hat in hand, revealing hair the color of wheat fields. "Might I walk you home again tonight?" His voice was always soft, as if he measured each word before spending it, but it carried a depth that made her listen carefully. "Mr. Cole, you seem to have made it your evening ritual," she replied, unable to keep a small smile from her lips. "Only if it's welcomed," he answered, those blue eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. "It is," she said simply, gathering her things. The night air held the promise of summer, though the chill still reminded them that the Colorado territory wasn't finished with spring yet. They walked side by side, not touching, with Zachary positioning himself between Clara and the street, as he always did. Their footsteps fell into a comfortable rhythm on the wooden sidewalks that lined the main street of Las Animas. "Your playing was especially fine tonight," Zachary commented, breaking their usual comfortable silence. "That last piece, I haven't heard it before." Clara glanced at him, surprised by his observation. Most men didn't notice the difference between one tune and another. "It's something I've been working on. My own composition, though it's not finished yet." Zachary nodded thoughtfully. "It has a certain longing to it, like it's searching for something." His insight startled her. The piece had come to her during sleepless nights when memories of her family and the life she'd left behind in Missouri surfaced. "Perhaps it is," she admitted. They turned onto the quieter street where Clara rented a small room above the milliner's shop. The gaslights were fewer here, the shadows deeper. "May I ask you something, Mr. Cole?" Clara ventured, curiosity finally overcoming her usual reserve. "Zachary, please," he corrected gently. "And yes, you may ask me anything." "Zachary, then." The name felt intimate on her tongue. "Why do you come every night, to the saloon, I mean? You don't seem the type to frequent such establishments." He was silent for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice even softer than usual. "My father played the fiddle," he said. "Before the war, he'd play in the evenings after the work was done. Said it helped wash away the day's dust." Zachary paused. "When I hear you play, it reminds me of those times before everything changed." The simple honesty of his answer touched something in Clara. She'd met many men in her travels westward, most of them quick with flattery but slow with truth. Zachary seemed to be built in reverse. "And where is your father now?" she asked. "Buried in Virginia. 1863. The date told its own story, the height of the Civil War. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. They reached the staircase that led up to her room. This was where they parted each night, with Zachary tipping his hat and waiting until she was safely inside before departing. "Thank you for the escort, Zachary," she said, using his given name deliberately. "My pleasure, Miss Ellison." "Clara," she corrected, making a decision. "If I'm to call you Zachary, then you must call me Clara." A small smile touched his lips, barely visible in the dim light. "Clara," he repeated, as if testing how the name felt. "Good night, then, Clara." "Good night, Zachary." As she climbed the stairs, she felt his eyes on her back, watching over her until she disappeared through her door. Only then did she hear his boots move away, the sound fading into the night. Inside her small room, Clara lit the lamp and placed her fiddle case on the narrow bed. The space was sparse but clean: a bed, a small table with a basin, a trunk for her few belongings, and a rocking chair by the window. She moved to the window and pulled back the curtain just enough to see the street below. Zachary was walking away, his broad shoulders squared against the night, hat set firmly on his head. There was something about him that called to her not just his appreciation for her music, but the quiet strength he carried. In a town full of men seeking fortune or running from failure, Zachary Cole seemed to know exactly who he was, even if he wasn't inclined to announce it to the world. Clara let the curtain fall back into place and turned to her small table. She took out a sheet of paper where she'd been noting down the melody that had come to her, the unfinished piece Zachary had commented on. She hummed it softly, hearing it with new ears after his observation about its searching quality. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the music was searching for something, or someone. The following evening, Clara arrived at the Frontier Saloon earlier than usual. Saturdays were always busier, with ranch hands and railroad workers flush with their week's pay and looking to spend it on whiskey and entertainment. She wore her best dress, a modest navy blue with lace at the collar that had once belonged to her mother. She'd carefully mended a small tear in the sleeve and polished her worn boots until they gleamed. Porter was already barking orders at his bartender, a young man named Thomas, who seemed perpetually overwhelmed by the demands of the job. The piano player, a round-faced man called Henry, was warming up with a jaunty tune that clashed with Clara's nerves. "Expecting a full house tonight," Porter informed her as she set up her small space. "Sheriff says there's a cattle drive passing through, cowboys with money to spend." Clara nodded, understanding what that meant: more coins in her case, but also more rowdy behavior to navigate. She tuned her fiddle with practiced fingers, tightening the horsehair bow to just the right tension. As the evening progressed, the saloon filled as predicted. The air grew thick with tobacco smoke and the mingled scents of whiskey, sweat, and leather. Clara played her usual repertoire, lively reels that got boots stomping, sentimental ballads that loosened coins from pockets, and a few hymns transformed into dance tunes for those who wanted to feel they hadn't strayed too far from their Sunday upbringing. She scanned the room between songs, looking for Zachary's familiar form in his usual corner. The table was occupied by a group of strangers, trail dusty men with loud laughs, and the hardened look of those who drove cattle across unforgiving terrain for a living. A twist of disappointment tightened in her chest. Perhaps he had business elsewhere. Or perhaps, like so many in this transient town, he'd moved on without farewell. Clara lifted her fiddle once more, launching into a spirited version of Buffalo Gals that soon had the room clapping along. She closed her eyes, losing herself in the music as she always did, letting her fingers find the notes by memory and feeling. When she opened her eyes again, he was there. Not at his usual table, but standing near the bar, hat in hand, watching her with that same intense focus. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Clara felt a sudden warmth that had nothing to do with the overheated saloon. She didn't miss a note, but her playing took on a new energy, a brightness that made several dancers whoop with appreciation. As the evening wore on, Clara became aware of one of the cattle drivers paying particular attention to her performance. A tall man with a red beard and a scar along one cheek. He moved closer to her small stage with each song, his eyes following her movements in a way that made her uncomfortable. During a brief break, as Clara sipped water to soothe her throat, the man approached. "Mighty fine playing, miss," he said, his voice slurred with whiskey. "Never seen a woman handle a fiddle like that before." "Thank you, sir," Clara replied politely, setting her glass down and reaching for her instrument, hoping to signal that her break was ending. The man stepped closer, blocking her path. "Name's Harlan, Frank Harlan. Been on the trail for 2 months with nothing but cows and campfire songs for company." He leaned in, the smell of cheap whiskey heavy on his breath. "Thought maybe you'd like to play something special just for me. Later, private-like." Clara stiffened. "I'm afraid my performances are for the saloon only, Mr. Harlan. If you'll excuse me, I need to continue." She tried to step around him, but he moved with her, his hand coming to rest heavily on her arm. "Now don't be unfriendly, little lady. I'm willing to pay handsome for your time." Before Clara could respond, another figure stepped between them. Zachary stood there, his posture relaxed but his eyes hard as flint. "The lady said no," he stated simply. Harlan's face darkened. "This ain't your business, cowboy. Step aside. I'm making it my business." Zachary's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it now. "Miss Ellison needs to continue her performance. Mr. Porter is particular about keeping to the schedule." For a tense moment, Clara thought Harlan might take a swing at Zachary. The cattle driver was bigger, with the raw-boned strength of a man used to physical labor. But something in Zachary's steady gaze made him reconsider. "Plenty other friendly women in this town," Harlan muttered, releasing Clara's arm. He jabbed a finger at Zachary's chest. "You ought to mind your own affairs, friend." "I always do," Zachary replied, not moving an inch. Harlan spat on the floor near Zachary's boots, then turned and shouldered his way back to his companions at the bar. Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you," she said quietly. Zachary turned to her, his expression softening. "Are you all right?" "Yes, thanks to you." She managed a small smile. "Though I fear Mr. Harlan won't be leaving a coin in my case tonight." "His loss," Zachary replied, a hint of warmth in his voice. "Your music is worth far more than whatever he was offering." Their eyes held for a moment longer than propriety might allow. Clara felt something shift between them, a recognition, perhaps, that their nightly walks had grown into something more meaningful than simple courtesy. I should continue, she said, gesturing to her fiddle. Zachary nodded. I'll be here. And he was, through the rest of her performance. Though he returned to a spot near the bar rather than his usual table, his presence was a comfort as Clara continued playing. She noticed that he positioned himself where he could keep an eye on both her and Harlan's group. His vigilance unobtrusive, but constant. When the final song ended, and the last of the patrons began to stumble out into the night or up to the rooms Porter rented upstairs, Zachary approached her as she packed away her fiddle. Your earnings seem good tonight, he observed, nodding at the coins she was collecting. Yes, cattle drives are always profitable for everyone in town. She hesitated, then added, though I'm particularly grateful for your presence this evening. Men like Harlan forget their manners when they've been too long on the trail, Zachary said, his tone neutral but his meaning clear. Some need reminding. Clara finished securing her fiddle case and gathered her shawl. Shall we? She asked, nodding toward the door. Outside, the night was clear and cool, stars scattered across the sky like silver dust. They fell into step together, their path lit by the moon and the occasional glow from a window. The town was quieter now, though distant piano music and laughter still drifted from other establishments that would continue operating until dawn. May I ask what brought you to Las Animas? Clara ventured, curious about this man who had become such a steadfast part of her evenings. Zachary was silent for a few strides. Work, initially, he finally said. I was riding with a cattle outfit that delivered a herd to the railroad here. The trail boss offered me a permanent position, but I decided to stay on in town instead. As what? Clara realized she'd never asked what he did during the days. I've been helping Douglas at the livery stable. Good with horses, always have been. He's getting on in years and needs the assistance. Zachary glanced at her. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest. There's value in that, Clara agreed. Honest work is sometimes hard to come by, especially for a woman alone. Is that what brought you here, work? Clara nodded. My mother died 2 years ago. We were planning to join my uncle in San Francisco. He has a shipping business there. But after she passed, I couldn't afford the full journey on my own. I've been working my way west, town by town. She smiled ruefully. Though I've been in Las Animas longer than I planned. Your uncle doesn't know where you are. I sent a letter when I first arrived explaining the delay, but I haven't heard back. She shrugged slightly. The mail can be unreliable and it's been years since they've seen me. Perhaps they've forgotten. Unlikely, Zachary said with quiet certainty. They reached the staircase to her room, but tonight, Clara was reluctant for their time together to end. Instead of bidding him good night as usual, she gestured to the small bench beside the milliner's door. Would you like to sit for a moment? The night is pleasant. If Zachary was surprised by the invitation, he didn't show it. He merely nodded and joined her on the bench, leaving a respectful distance between them. Your intervention tonight was very timely, Clara said after a comfortable silence. I've had to handle difficult patrons before, but Mr. Harlan seemed particularly insistent. Men who spend months with only the company of other men and cattle sometimes forget how to behave around women, Zachary observed. Not that it excuses his behavior. Have you done that work? Cattle driving? Yes, for several years after the war. It suited me then. Constant movement, simple objectives, not much need for conversation. There was a hint of self-deprecation in his tone. And now, Clara prompted gently. Zachary turned to look at her, his face half illuminated by moonlight, half in shadow. Now I'm finding reasons to stay in one place. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Clara felt her heart quicken. I'm glad, she said simply, holding his gaze. A clock somewhere in town struck midnight, breaking the moment. Clara stood, and Zachary followed suit. "Thank you again for your company, Zachary," she said, "and for your protection earlier." "It was my honor, Clara." He said her name with a gentleness that made it sound like something precious. Impulsively, Clara reached out and touched his hand briefly. "Good night." A flicker of surprise crossed his face at the contact, followed by something warmer. "Good night, Clara. Sleep well." As she climbed the stairs to her room, she felt his presence below, watching over her until she was safely inside, as he did every night. But tonight, before closing her door, she turned and looked back down at him. He stood with his hat in his hands, his face upturned to her, and in that moment, Clara knew with certainty that her heart was no longer entirely her own. The next morning dawned bright and clear, a Sunday with church bells ringing across Las Animas. Clara dressed in her Sunday best, a simple gray dress with a lace collar, and prepared for the day. Sundays were her only day away from the saloon, a concession porter made more to public opinion than religious conviction. After church service, Clara usually spent the afternoon alone, often practicing new pieces on her fiddle or mending clothes. Today, however, as she exited the small white church on the edge of town, she was surprised to see Zachary waiting nearby, dressed in a clean shirt and his least worn pair of trousers, his hair neatly combed under his hat. "Good morning, Clara," he greeted, touching the brim of his hat. "Zachary," she replied, unable to hide her pleasure at seeing him in daylight for the first time. "I didn't see you at the service." A shadow of discomfort passed across his features. "I haven't been inside a church since before the war," he admitted. "But I thought perhaps you might allow me to accompany you on a walk. It's a fine day for it," Clara smiled. "I'd like that very much." They strolled away from the church and the curious glances of the congregation. Las Animas on a Sunday afternoon was quieter than usual, with many businesses closed and families gathered for their midday meals. "There's a spot by the river I sometimes visit," Clara suggested. "It's peaceful there." Zachary nodded, and they headed toward the Purgatoire River that flowed past the eastern edge of town. The spring melt had swollen its banks, but today it ran clear and bright under the Colorado sun. They found a grassy spot beneath a cottonwood tree and sat, watching the water flow past. Clara spread her handkerchief on the grass before sitting, smoothing her skirts carefully. "You miss Virginia?" she asked, remembering his mention of his father's burial place. Zachary considered the question. "I miss what it was before the war," he finally said. "The farm where I grew up, my mother's garden, my father's music in the evenings." He plucked a blade of grass, rolling it between his fingers. "But that place doesn't exist anymore. The farm was burned during the fighting. My mother died soon after my father." "I'm sorry," Clara said softly. "It seems we both know something of loss," he nodded. "It shapes a person, loss does, changes the path you thought you'd walk." "Yes," Clara agreed, thinking of her own diverted journey west, "though sometimes new paths lead to unexpected places." Their eyes met, and Clara felt that same connection that had sparked between them the night before, a recognition of something kindred. "May I ask about your music?" Zachary inquired. "You play with such feeling. It seems more than just a way to earn your living." Clara smiled, touched by his perception. "My father taught me when I was very young. He played for country dances back in Missouri. When he died, I was 12. My mother insisted I continue practicing. She said music was the one thing that couldn't be taken from me, no matter what happened." Her fingers moved unconsciously, as if finding notes on invisible strings. "When we lost our home after the war, my fiddle was one of the few things we kept." "It's a gift," Zachary said. "Your playing, I mean." I've heard many fiddlers in my travels, but none that make the instrument speak the way you do." The compliment warmed her. "Thank you. It means a great deal, coming from someone who understands music." "I don't play myself," he clarified, "but growing up hearing my father, I learned to listen." "Sometimes that's just as important as playing," Clara observed. "To truly hear the music." They talked for hours, the afternoon slipping away as they shared stories and observations. Clara learned that Zachary had fought for the Confederacy, though he spoke little of the actual fighting. He'd been wounded at Gettysburg and spent months recovering in a field hospital. After the war, with no home to return to, he drifted west, working cattle drives, breaking horses, taking whatever honest work he could find. In turn, Clara told him about growing up in a small Missouri town, her family's struggles during the war years, and her mother's long illness afterward. She spoke of their plan to start fresh in San Francisco and how her mother's death had left her alone with barely enough money for half the journey. "I never intended to play in saloons," she admitted. "My mother would be scandalized, but it was either that or—" She let the sentence hang, unwilling to articulate the other options available to women without resources or protection. "You've done what you needed to survive," Zachary said, no judgment in his voice. "There's no shame in that." The sun began its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the river. Reluctantly, Clara stood, brushing grass from her skirts. "I should return to town," she said. "Mrs. Hamilton sometimes invites me to Sunday supper." Mrs. Hamilton was the milliner who owned the shop below Clara's room, a widow who had taken a motherly interest in the young fiddle player. Zachary rose as well. "May I walk you back?" "I'd like that," Clara replied, growing accustomed to his courteous offers. As they walked back toward town, their hands brushed accidentally. Clara felt a jolt of awareness at the contact, and from Zachary's sudden intake of breath, he'd felt it too. Neither commented on it, but their pace slowed as if both were reluctant for the afternoon to end. When they reached the milliner's shop, Zachary paused. "Clara," he began, then hesitated. "Would you permit me to call on you properly? Perhaps next Sunday if you're free." Clara felt a surge of pleasure at the formal request. "I would like that very much, Zachary." His smile transformed his face, softening the lines that hardship had etched around his eyes and mouth. "Until this evening, then," he said, tipping his hat. "This evening," she echoed, realizing he would still be at the saloon, still walk her home afterward. The thought filled her with a warm anticipation that carried her through Mrs. Hamilton's well-intentioned gossip and bland stew. That night at the Frontier Saloon, Clara played with a new lightness in her heart. The cattle drive had moved on, taking Frank Harlan and his unwelcome attentions with it. The Sunday crowd was smaller, mostly locals who came as much for the company as the whiskey. Zachary sat at his usual corner table, his eyes following her as she moved through her repertoire. When it came time for her final piece, Clara made a spontaneous decision. Instead of closing with the lively reel she usually played, she began the unfinished melody Zachary had commented on, the one he'd said had a searching quality. She'd worked on it more over the past few days, finding new phrases, expanding the central theme. As she played, she watched Zachary's face. His eyes closed briefly, then opened, meeting hers across the room with an intensity that made her fingers falter for a split second before finding the thread of the music again. She played directly to him, letting the melody speak what words couldn't yet express: longing, hope, the tentative beginnings of something deeper than friendship. When the last note faded, there was a moment of complete silence before the applause began. Clara curtsied, her eyes still on Zachary, who hadn't joined in the clapping but sat watching her with an expression that sent warmth flooding through her. As she packed up her fiddle, Porter approached, counting out her night's earnings. "That last piece," he commented, handing her the coins. "New one, isn't it? Got old Samuel Whitaker misty-eyed, and he claims he hasn't cried since Lincoln was shot." Clara smiled, tucking the money into her reticule. "I'm still working on it." "Well, it's good. Different but good." Porter glanced toward Zachary, who was now standing near the door, waiting. "Your cowboy's waiting. Seems he's become a permanent fixture." "He's not my cowboy, Mr. Porter," Clara corrected automatically, though the words lacked conviction. Porter snorted. "Way he looks at you says different, Miss Ellison. And if I'm not mistaken, the way you look back at him says you don't mind it one bit." Clara felt herself blush, but didn't deny it. She bid Porter good night and joined Zachary at the door. Outside, the night was warmer than it had been, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of distant rain. They walked in companionable silence for a while, their footsteps in perfect rhythm. "That piece you ended with," Zachary finally said. "It's changed since I last heard it." Clara nodded. "I've been working on it. It felt unfinished before." "And now," she considered his question, "it's closer to completion, I think, but not quite there yet." Zachary seemed to understand she wasn't just talking about the music. "Some compositions take time to reveal themselves fully," he observed. "The important part is listening for where they want to go." They reached her staircase, but instead of saying good night immediately, Zachary hesitated. "Clara," he began, his voice lower than usual. "That melody, when you played it tonight, it felt like you were saying something meant for me to hear." Her heart quickened. "Perhaps I was. I'm not a man of many words," he continued, "but I want you to know that whatever you were saying with that music, I heard it, and I—" He paused, searching for the right words. Clara took a small step closer to him. "And you?" she prompted softly. In the dim light of the street lamp, she saw his Adam's apple bob as he swallowed. "And I feel the same," he finished simply. The confession hung in the air between them, changing everything and nothing all at once. Clara felt as though she were standing on the edge of a cliff, exhilarated and terrified simultaneously. "Zachary," she whispered, her voice barely audible even to herself. He moved closer, closing the distance between them until barely a handspan separated them. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, he raised his hand and gently touched her cheek with work-roughened fingers. Clara leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness of the gesture. When she opened them again, Zachary was looking at her with such warmth that it took her breath away. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping briefly to her lips. "Yes," she breathed. His kiss was gentle, almost reverent, his lips warm against hers. Clara felt something inside her unfurl, like a flower opening to the sun. Her free hand came up to rest lightly on his shoulder as the kiss deepened slightly, still gentle but with a hint of the passion that lay carefully banked beneath Zachary's controlled exterior. When they parted, Clara kept her eyes closed for a moment, savoring the sensation. When she opened them, Zachary was watching her with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time I heard you play," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Why didn't you?" Clara asked, her own voice unsteady. "I needed to be sure you'd welcome it." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone in a feather-light caress. "I've learned patience over the years," Clara smiled. "A virtue I appreciate, though in this case, perhaps unnecessary." Zachary returned her smile, and in that moment he looked younger, the weight of his past temporarily lifted from his shoulders. "Good night, Clara Ellison," he said softly. "Good night, Zachary Cole," she replied, reluctantly stepping back. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Clara felt as if her feet barely touched the steps. Behind her door, she leaned against the wood, pressing her fingertips to her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. Outside her window, she heard his footsteps pause before moving away, as if he too were reluctant for the evening to end. Clara moved to the window and watched his tall figure disappear down the street, his stride steady and purposeful. For the first time in years, she felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope, blossoming like a desert flower after rain. The following days took on a new rhythm, a counterpoint of anticipation and fulfillment. Each evening at the saloon, Zachary would arrive just as Clara began her first set. Each night, he would watch her play with that same intensity that both unnerved and thrilled her. Each night, he would walk her home, their conversations growing deeper, more intimate, punctuated now by gentle touches and tender kisses in the shadows before they parted. During the days, Zachary worked at the livery stable, while Clara practiced new pieces and occasionally gave music lessons to the children of Las Animas' more prosperous families. Sometimes in the afternoons, if his work allowed, Zachary would meet her for walks along the river or bring her wildflowers he'd found on the outskirts of town. A week after their first kiss, Zachary invited Clara to have supper with him at the small restaurant near the hotel. It was a modest establishment, but considered respectable enough for a proper courtship. Clara wore her blue dress and arranged her hair with special care, securing it with the new ribbon she'd purchased with her earnings. "You look beautiful," Zachary said when he called for her, his eyes warming as he took in her appearance. "Thank you," she replied, accepting his offered arm. "You look quite handsome yourself." It was true he'd had his hair trimmed and wore a clean white shirt with a string tie, his boots polished to a shine. The restaurant was busy but not crowded. The proprietor, a plump woman named Mrs. Jenkins, led them to a table by the window with a knowing smile. Clara realized that their courtship had not gone unnoticed in the small town. Over a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, they talked more openly than ever before. Zachary spoke of his plans to eventually buy land, perhaps start a small horse ranch. Clara shared her love of teaching music and her hope to one day have a proper music room where she could instruct students. "You still plan to continue to San Francisco?" Zachary asked, his tone carefully neutral. Clara hesitated. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "The plan made sense when my mother was alive. Now," she looked at him directly, "now I find my priorities changing." Something like relief flickered across his face. "I'm glad to hear it," he said simply. As they walked back to her room after supper, their hands found each other, fingers intertwining naturally. The physical contact, though modest by some standards, felt significant to Clara, a public acknowledgement of their growing attachment. "People will talk," she noted, glancing at their joined hands. "Let them," Zachary replied with a slight shrug. "Unless you object." "No," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "I don't object at all." When they reached her staircase, Zachary turned to face her, still holding her hand in his. "Clara," he began, his expression serious, "I want you to know that my intentions are honorable. I know our acquaintance has been brief in some ways, but I've never felt this way about anyone before." Clara's heart raced at his words. "Nor I," she confessed. "I'm not a wealthy man," he continued. "The work at the livery is steady but modest, and I carry burdens from the past that sometimes weigh heavily." He paused. "But if you could see your way clear to consider a future with me, I would do everything in my power to make you happy." It wasn't quite a proposal, but the implication was clear. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "Zachary," she said softly, "I don't need wealth, and we all have burdens from the past." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "What matters to me is the man you are now: kind, honorable, gentle. The man who listens to my music as if it's the most important sound in the world. He turned his head slightly to press a kiss to her palm. It is to me, he said simply. Their kiss that night was deeper, more urgent, hinting at passions they both kept carefully in check. When they finally parted, both were breathing faster, eyes bright in the dim light. Sunday, Zachary said, his voice rough. Will you spend the day with me? I'd like to show you something. Yes, Clara agreed without hesitation. What time should I be ready? Early, if you don't mind, around 7, and wear something suitable for riding. Clara raised an eyebrow. Riding, Zachary smiled. Trust me. Yes, she said again and meant it completely. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Clara dressed in her simplest skirt and a sturdy shirtwaist, her hair braided and pinned up securely. At precisely 7 o'clock, she heard hoofbeats below her window and looked out to see Zachary waiting with 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. She hurried downstairs, excitement bubbling in her chest. Zachary greeted her with a smile that made her heart skip. Good morning, he said, helping her mount the mare with strong, sure hands. Have you ridden much? Some, though it's been a while, Clara admitted, adjusting her skirts and taking the reins. The mare stood patiently, seeming unperturbed by her inexperienced rider. Daisy is the calmest horse in Douglas's stable, Zachary assured her, swinging up onto his own mount with practiced ease. She'll take good care of you. They rode out of town at a leisurely pace, heading northwest toward the foothills. The morning air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Clara found her riding skills returning quickly, and soon she was comfortable enough to look around and appreciate the stunning landscape. Where are we going? She asked as they left the last outlying buildings behind. There's a place about an hour's ride from town, Zachary replied. A small valley I found while tracking some strays for Douglas. I thought you might like to see it. The ride took them through rolling grasslands that gave way to more rugged terrain as they approached the foothills. Clara marveled at the vastness of the landscape, so different from the wooded hills of Missouri where she'd grown up. It's beautiful, she commented as they crested a small rise. So open and free, Zachary nodded. That's what drew me to this country after the war. After years of fighting in woods and fields where you couldn't see what was coming at you, all this space feels like breathing room. Clara studied his profile, understanding something new about him. Is that why you stay out west, for the open spaces? He considered her question. Partly. And partly because there's less history here. People don't ask what side you fought on or what you did during the war. They judge you on who you are now, what you can contribute. A chance to start fresh, Clara observed. Exactly. He looked at her with those serious blue eyes. Like you, coming west for a new beginning. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Finally, Zachary guided them around a rocky outcropping, and Clara gasped at what lay before them. A small, hidden valley opened up, cradled by gentle slopes dotted with pine trees. A clear stream wound through its center, and the ground was carpeted with wildflowers in purple, yellow, and white. The morning sun bathed the scene in golden light, making it look like something from a dream. "Oh, Zachary," Clara breathed. "It's magnificent." He smiled, pleased by her reaction. "I thought you might like it." He dismounted and came to help her down from Daisy. Clara's legs were a bit stiff from the ride, and she stumbled slightly as her feet touched the ground. Zachary caught her, his hands strong and steady at her waist. For a moment they stood very close, his face inches from hers. "Thank you for bringing me here," she said softly, his eyes darkened. "I've wanted to share it with you since I found it. Somehow it seemed like a place you should see." They led the horses to the stream to drink. then tied them to a tree with enough slack to graze. Zachary produced a small bundle from his saddlebag, a blanket, and a modest picnic of bread, cheese, and apples. They sat on the blanket by the stream, the sun warming their shoulders as they ate and talked. Clara found herself completely at ease, more comfortable with Zachary than she'd ever been with anyone outside her family. "You mentioned your uncle in San Francisco," Zachary said as they finished their simple meal. "Have you had any word from him?" Clara shook her head. "No, though to be fair, he wouldn't know exactly where to reach me. My last letter just said I was stopping in Colorado territory for a while." She picked a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. "I should write again, I suppose, let him know I'm well." "And that you found reasons to stay," Zachary suggested quietly. Clara looked up at him, her heart full. "Yes," she agreed. "Very good reasons." Zachary reached for her hand, his expression growing serious. "Clara, I need to tell you something about my past." She squeezed his hand encouragingly. "You can tell me anything, Zachary." He took a deep breath. "During the war, I did things I'm not proud of, things that haunt me still." His eyes dropped to their joined hands. "I was a sharpshooter for the Confederate Army. I was good at it, too good. They would position me ahead of the main forces, sometimes for days, waiting for the right targets." Clara felt a chill despite the warm sun. She knew enough about war to understand what he was telling her. "I took lives, Clara, not in the heat of battle, but coldly from a distance, men who never saw it coming." His voice was flat, emotionless, as if the only way he could say the words was to detach himself from their meaning. "War makes terrible demands of men," Clara said softly. "My father said that after he returned from fighting with the Union, he wasn't the same man who left us." Zachary nodded. "It changes you, kills something inside that never fully comes back to life." He finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "After Gettysburg, when I was wounded, I had fever dreams for weeks, saw the faces of men I'd never actually seen up close, heard their voices, though I'd never heard them speak." Clara moved closer to him on the blanket, still holding his hand. "Is that why you don't attend church?" "Because you feel unforgiven," a muscle twitched in his jaw. "Partly, and partly because I'm not sure I deserve forgiveness, or if I even believe in it anymore." "Zachary," Clara said, reaching up to touch his face, turning it gently toward her. "What you did as a soldier following orders in a war not of your making. The fact that it troubles you that you carry this burden shows the kind of man you truly are." He covered her hand with his own, his eyes searching hers. "I needed you to know, before we go any further. I wanted no secrets between us." The implication of his words made Clara's heart race. "Thank you for trusting me with this," she said. "It doesn't change how I feel about you." Relief washed over his features. "And how is that exactly?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his question. Clara smiled, suddenly certain. "I love you, Zachary Cole," she said simply. "I think I have since you first walked me home in the rain, even if I didn't recognize it then." His eyes widened, and for a moment he looked almost boyish in his surprise. Then his face transformed with a smile that Clara knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "I love you too, Clara Ellison," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than I ever thought possible." He leaned forward and kissed her, a kiss that contained all the feelings they just confessed, tender and passionate, gentle and fierce. Clara wound her arms around his neck, drawing him closer, her heart soaring with joy and certainty. When they finally broke apart, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife. Let me care for you, protect you, love you for all the days we're given." Tears filled Clara's eyes as happiness overflowed within her. "Yes," she said through a watery smile. "Yes, I'll marry you, Zachary." He kissed her again, sealing their promise to each other. Around them, the wildflowers nodded in a gentle breeze, the stream gurgled its constant song, and two horses grazed contentedly, unaware that their riders' lives had just changed forever. Later, as they prepared to return to town, Zachary helped Clara mount Daisy, his hands lingering at her waist. "When?" he asked, looking up at her. "How soon can you be ready?" Clara laughed, delighted by his eagerness. "That depends," she teased. "How soon can you be ready?" "Tomorrow," he said immediately, then smiled at her surprised expression. "But I suppose we should do things properly. Give notice, allow time for preparations." 2 weeks, Clara suggested. "That should be enough time to arrange everything. A simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." Zachary nodded, clearly pleased. 2 weeks, and then you'll be Mrs. Zachary Cole. The name sent a thrill through her. "Mrs. Zachary Cole," she repeated, testing how it sounded. "I like that very much." He mounted his own horse and they turned back toward Las Animas, riding side by side. The future stretched before them like the vast Colorado sky, full of promise, possibility, and the certainty of love discovered against all odds in a frontier saloon. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Clara gave notice to Porter that she would be leaving the frontier saloon, though she agreed to play until her wedding day. The saloon owner grumbled, but admitted he'd seen it coming from the moment Zachary first walked her home. "Never seen a man listen to music the way he listens to yours," Porter remarked. "Like it's water and he's been crossing the desert for a month." News of their engagement spread quickly through Las Animas. Mrs. Hamilton insisted on helping Clara prepare a proper trousseau, though her resources were limited. The milliner's generosity touched Clara deeply. "Every bride should have something special," Mrs. Hamilton declared as she presented Clara with a length of cream-colored lace for a wedding veil. "I've had this tucked away for years. My daughter would want you to have it." Zachary, meanwhile, was making his own preparations. He spoke with Reverend Patterson about the ceremony and secured permission to build a small cabin on a piece of land at the edge of town that belonged to his employer, Mr. Douglas. The old livery stable owner had taken a paternal interest in Zachary over the months and offered the land as a wedding gift. "Been wanting to semi-retire anyway," Douglas told Zachary. "You can take over more of the stable business, live on that corner acre, and I'll just come in for the bookkeeping and to boss you around occasionally." It was a generous arrangement that would give the newlyweds a secure start. Zachary immediately began construction on a modest but sturdy 2-room cabin, working from dawn until it was time to meet Clara at the saloon each evening. Friends from town, including the blacksmith and the carpenter, pitched in to help, ensuring the basic structure would be ready by the wedding day. 5 days before the wedding, Clara was practicing a new piece on her fiddle when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Mrs. Jenkins, the restaurant owner, standing there with an envelope in hand. "Special delivery came on today's stage," Mrs. Jenkins announced, holding out the letter. "Postmarked San Francisco. Thought you'd want it right away." Clara's heart leaped as she recognized her uncle's handwriting on the envelope. "Thank you, Mrs. Jenkins," she said, accepting the letter with slightly trembling fingers. Alone, she sat on her bed and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a lengthy letter from her Uncle William, expressing first concern, then relief at hearing she was safe in Colorado. He apologized for the delayed response, explaining that her previous letter had reached him while he was away on business in Hawaii for several months. The letter continued with news of the family shipping business, which was thriving, and reiterated the standing invitation for Clara to join them in San Francisco. But it was the final paragraph that brought tears to her eyes. Your news of a possible attachment in Las Animas intrigues us greatly. Your aunt and I wish only for your happiness, dear niece, and if you have found love and purpose in Colorado, then we bless your choice. Enclosed, please find a bank draft which, though modest, might help establish you in your new life. Consider it both a wedding gift and a portion of what would have been your dear mother's share in the family business. She would be proud of the independent, resourceful young woman you have become. The bank draft, which fluttered out as Clara unfolded the letter, was for $500, a sum that left her momentarily breathless. It was more money than she had seen at one time in her entire life. That evening, when Zachary came to escort her to the saloon, Clara showed him both the letter and the bank draft. "This changes things," she said excitedly. "We could add another room to the cabin, maybe even a proper music room where I could teach. And furnishings, real furnishings, not just the bare necessities." Zachary studied the bank draft, his expression unreadable. "It's very generous," he said finally. "Your uncle seems like a good man." Clara sensed a hesitation in his voice. "What is it? Aren't you pleased?" He folded the draft carefully and handed it back to her. "Of course I'm pleased for you, Clara. It's just—" He paused, choosing his words. "I wanted to provide for you, to build our life together with my own hands, my own labor." Understanding dawned. "Zachary," she said gently, taking his hands in hers, "this money doesn't change that. We're still building our life together with your strength and my music and both our dreams." She squeezed his hands. "This is simply a gift, a blessing on our marriage from family who care for me." "Would you deny us that start?" His expression softened. "No, of course not. Forgive me, pride has always been my weakness." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You're right. We'll use it wisely to build the future we both want." Clara nestled against him, content. "Our future," she murmured. "I like the sound of that." The night before their wedding, Clara played her final performance at the Frontier Saloon. Word had spread throughout town, and the establishment was more crowded than she'd ever seen it. Even Reverend Patterson made an appearance, though he stayed only long enough to hear one hymn-turned-ballad before departing with a nod of approval. For her final piece, Clara played the composition she'd been working on since the night Zachary had first commented on its searching quality. Now completed, it had evolved into a complex, emotionally rich melody that began with questioning phrases that gradually transformed into a confident, joyful theme. As the last notes faded, the saloon erupted in applause. Men who normally showed little sentiment wiped suspiciously damp eyes, and Porter himself presented her with a silver dollar for luck, he gruffly explained. Afterward, as Zachary walked her home for the last time before she would become his wife, Clara felt a strange mixture of nostalgia and anticipation. "I'll miss these walks in some ways," she admitted as they approached her staircase. "They've become special to me." "We can still walk together in the evenings," Zachary suggested, drawing her close. "Just because we'll be living under the same roof doesn't mean we can't stroll under the stars when we wish to." Clara smiled up at him. "I'd like that." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" His eyes, warm in the lamplight, held hers steadily. "About marrying you, not for a moment." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "About the ceremony itself, with everyone watching, perhaps a little." She laughed softly. "I feel the same." She rose on tiptoe to kiss him lightly. "This time tomorrow, we'll be husband and wife." "Husband and wife," he repeated, as if savoring the words. "I never thought I'd be blessed enough to say those words." His expression grew serious. "I promise you, Clara, I will spend every day of our life together trying to be worthy of your love." "Oh, Zachary," she whispered, touched beyond words, "you already are." Their kiss was deep and tender, a promise of all the tomorrows waiting for them, When they finally parted, both were breathless. "Until tomorrow," Zachary said, stepping back reluctantly. "Until tomorrow," Clara echoed, her heart too full for more words. She watched him walk away, then climbed the stairs to her room for the last time as Clara Ellison. Tomorrow, she would become Clara Cole, and a new life would begin. The wedding day dawned bright and clear, as if even the weather wished to bless their union. Clara dressed with Mrs. Hamilton's help, her trembling fingers struggling with the buttons of her gown, a simple but elegant creation of cream-colored cotton, trimmed with the lace her landlady had given her. "You look beautiful, my dear," Mrs. Hamilton said, adjusting the veil carefully over Clara's upswept hair. "Like an angel," Clara blushed at the praise. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Hamilton, for your kindness these past months and especially for your help with the wedding." The older woman's eyes misted. "It's been my pleasure, Clara. You've brought music back into my life not just with your fiddle, but with your spirit." The small church was filled to capacity when Clara arrived. It seemed that most of Las Animas had turned out for the occasion. Porter had closed the saloon for the afternoon, a gesture that spoke volumes about his regard for his former fiddle player. At the front of the church stood Zachary, looking more handsome than Clara had ever seen him in a new suit purchased for the occasion. His face, when he turned and saw her walking toward him, transformed with a joy so pure that tears sprang to Clara's eyes. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful. They exchanged simple vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through all the seasons of life. When Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, Zachary's kiss was gentle but held a promise that made Clara blush beneath her veil. The celebration afterward was held at the restaurant, which Mrs. Jenkins had closed to regular customers for the occasion. There was food and drink, laughter and music. Someone had brought a fiddle, and Clara was persuaded to play one tune, the completed composition that had become, in her mind, her and Zachary's story set to music. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the festivities. Zachary had borrowed Douglas's buckboard for the occasion, and he helped Clara up onto the seat with careful hands. "Ready to see our home, Mrs. Cole?" he asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. "More than ready, Mr. Cole," she replied, her heart light with happiness. The cabin, though simple, was a marvel to Clara. Zachary had worked tirelessly to make it comfortable, from the smooth wooden floors to the stone fireplace that would warm them through the Colorado winters. The main room held a sturdy table and chairs, a small settee near the fireplace, and shelves for Clara's few books and treasures. The bedroom, separated by a door for privacy, contained a wide bed with a colorful quilt made by the women of Las Animas as a wedding gift. "It's perfect," Clara breathed as Zachary showed her through the rooms. "Absolutely perfect." "There's one more thing," he said, taking her hand and leading her to a small addition at the back of the cabin that she hadn't noticed initially. He opened the door to reveal a bright space with windows on 3 sides, empty except for a single chair in the center. "Your music room," Zachary explained. "We can add more furniture as we're able, but I wanted you to have a place for your fiddle and your students from the start." Clara turned to him, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Zachary," she whispered, unable to find words adequate to express her feelings. He understood without words, gathering her into his arms and holding her close. "Welcome home, Clara Cole," he murmured against her hair. Their first night as husband and wife was a discovery of new intimacies, tender and passionate by turns. Zachary's gentleness and patience helped ease Clara's natural nervousness, and together they learned the language of love that needed no words. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, Clara rested her head on Zachary's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Completely," she assured him, pressing a kiss to his skin. "And you?" His arms tightened around her. "More than I ever thought possible." In the years that followed, their love deepened and matured like fine whiskey. The cabin expanded as their family grew, first with the birth of their son, William, named after Clara's uncle, and 2 years later, a daughter they called Elizabeth, after Zachary's mother. Clara's music room became a center for culture in Las Animas, with children and adults coming for lessons throughout the week. Zachary eventually took over the livery stable completely when Douglas retired, adding a small horse breeding operation that became known for quality stock throughout the territory. They had their challenges: a difficult winter when William was small and fell ill with fever, a drought that threatened the livery business, the normal disagreements that come with building a life together. But through it all, their love remained constant, a melody that sustained them through harmony and occasional discord alike. Sometimes in the evenings, after the children were asleep, Zachary would sit on the porch and listen as Clara played her fiddle in the fading light. And sometimes, when the music ended, he would walk her home just the few steps from her music room to their bedroom, continuing the ritual that had begun their journey together. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat together on that same porch watching the sunset paint the Colorado sky in shades of gold and crimson, Zachary took Clara's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Not continuing to San Francisco, the life you might have had there?" Clara looked at him, at the face she had come to know better than her own, lined now with a decade of weather and laughter and shared experience. She thought of their children sleeping inside, of the music room where her creativity had flourished, of the community they'd helped build. "Not for a single moment," she said, squeezing his hand. "My music led me to you, and you led me home. What more could anyone ask of life?" Zachary's smile, still capable of making her heart skip even after all these years, was answer enough. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, he leaned over and kissed her a kiss that held all the tenderness of their first embrace and all the depth of the years they'd shared since. In the distance, the sound of a piano drifted from the Frontier Saloon, where another musician now entertained the patrons of Las Animas. But in Clara's heart, the melody that had begun the night, a quiet cowboy first listened to her fiddle and then walked her home, continued to play a love song without end.